Hello, everyone. Great to see you here. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Zach Sorrells. I'm from Skillfluence, and myself, along with my colleague, Rachel Clark, will be your guide for today. It's great to see everybody introduce themselves in the chat box. If you haven't already, drop in your name, say hello. It's great to see everybody here. We have an absolute jam-packed session today. It's fantastic. Super excited that you guys could make it today. I know how busy everybody is, and extremely grateful for you taking an hour out of your very busy schedule to spend it with us. And our goal really, is to make sure that in this hour, when you look back on this hour, you go and say, man, that was a great investment of 1 hour. I learned so much. I can use what I learned. Thank you, Skillfluence, for doing that. That's the goal. All right, cool. Well, it'll be Rachel and myself will be kind of taking you through this today. If you haven't met me before, my name is Zach Sorrells. I'm with Skillfluence. I'm the CTO and head of program development. And basically what my job is, I work with universities and research centers to try to understand their challenges and their issues, largely in the area of knowledge exchange, commercialization, industry engagement, and develop solutions to help address some of those challenges. I come from an industry background, kind of been working in innovation and commercialization for now getting on 25 years, and been with Skillfluence for about 6 years now. I'll be taking you through this today with my co-host, Rachel. Over to you, Rachel. You can give a quick introduction.
Thanks, Zach. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Rachel Clark. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Skillfluence. I've been here for just over 4 years from a career at Strathclyde University. So I bring my knowledge of research and professional services here to Skillfluence and lead on the knowledge exchange and impact agenda. So I get involved in sales meetings and run right through the operations team to our fantastic delivery. So fantastic to be here and sharing this stage with Zach today.
All right, let's get into this. You ready to go, Rachel? All right,
ready to go.
Let's do it. All right, good. So who is Skillfluence? Real quick introduction for those of you who haven't met us or worked with us before. We've been around for about 9 years now. Actually, Friday was our 9th birthday, so happy birthday to us. But our mission in life really is to help researchers create maximum socioeconomic value from their research while helping them achieve their life and career goals. And the way that we do this is we develop programs, develop and deliver programs that equip researchers with the tools, the skills, the confidence to be more successful with knowledge exchange, commercialization, and impact. Now, as I said, we've been around for about 9 years. We work with more than 80 universities. You can see probably universities that you're connected with on the map here. Train more than 25,000 researchers, PhD students, professional service staff. We've got a team of trainers. So we've kind of been doing this for a while with a lot of folks and kind of drawing on that experience as we go through this. But enough about us. What's the point of today's webinar? So today's webinar, really, we're going to be exploring a recent pilot program that we ran. And the program was designed to really equip professional service staff with the tools, skills, and confidence they need to enable them to increase their capacity to support increased levels of commercialization. And in today's webinar, we're going to kind of break it down into kind of 5 key elements. First is really focused on understanding the challenge. What is going on here? Why is this difficult? We're going to look at this from a professional service perspective, and we've got some great guests to help us with that. We're going to talk a little bit about the design of the program itself, the key results, learnings, and takeaways, and finally, where do we plan on going from here? And also how you might be able to get involved if you would like to. Okay, so it's a full session, but hopefully there's lots of good stuff for you there. And we are absolutely delighted and super lucky to have 3 fantastic guests with us today. So Dr. Orla Kelly, she's been helping us, or she's been really critical to getting the pilot program put together. Dr. Annika Hoke, she was one of the participants, and Susan Armstrong was also a participant from Glasgow Caledonian University. They were a team going through the program together. So these guests are going to really share their insights and perspectives, kind of more broadly about the challenge, but also about how the program, how the program helped them, and how we might be able to move it forward from here. Okay, so the issue here is that, fundamentally, what's the situation? There is significant untapped commercial potential within existing university research portfolios. I don't think this is a controversial statement, right? I think we can agree, right? We are sitting on billions, if not trillions of pounds worth of commercial opportunity, okay? But the challenge is, and the question is, how do we release this untapped commercial potential? How do we do this? And this really was the starting point for this pilot program. Okay. Now, to understand the challenge, I'd like to kind of present 3 frameworks, if you will, to kind of help us understand what is going on here. Because if we can better understand the challenge, we better understand the situation, we'll be better equipped to develop and deploy a solution, an effective solution. So the first framework I'd like to kind of introduce here is kind of a typical kind of commercialization process, right? And it's a relatively simplistic model, but it kind of gives a shape to it. If the goal is to get kind of ideas out into the world, delivered into the world where they're delivering commercial value, we go through kind of key stages. The first stage is around creating, right? We come up with an idea. Hey, I got an idea for a new technology or new business, whatever that is. Now, that idea probably isn't a fully formed commercial opportunity as such, right? Then we move that into the define phase. What we do in the define phase is that we turn that kind of seed idea into a more robust, more completely defined commercial opportunity. So considering things like, who might the customer be? What problem are we solving? How might we actually do that? What might the commercial model be, right? These types of things. And even at an early stage, we can start to define that. Now, what we're also doing in that define stage is we're also working to define the key unknowns, right? Because any new idea, there'll be lots of unknowns around that. So we define those unknowns. Now, once we have a clearly defined idea, we move that into discovery. And what we're fundamentally doing in discovery is we're making the unknowns known, right? Questions that we have. Will it work? Is there a customer for it? Can we make money for it? Like these questions that we have to answer to determine if it's a viable opportunity. Once we've made enough unknowns known through discovery, we can then build it, right? We can start to develop it. Once we've built it and developed it, we can then go to market with it. Now, it's not as clean, as simple as that. You kind of go forward and then step back, but it kind of gives a model of how this might work. Now, why is this important? Why is this important? Because if we can understand, if we can look at that system, right? And this is the system of commercializing university research as well, right? Because if we can look at that system and that process and go, where is it not working very well? What is the problem? We can then start to, in a very purposeful and targeted and strategic way, develop solutions to make that whole system, whole process work better, resulting in more higher quality commercial opportunities coming out at the end, okay? Another important framework to think about, so the innovation process is an important framework. Another framework is we're thinking about here is what is required for sustained behavior, because a lot of what we're trying to do is to get researchers to engage in commercial activity. So why aren't they engaging in commercial activity more? Or how do we get them to engage more? And we've got to consider three key elements for sustained behavior. The first is motivation. They have to want to do it. Capacity. They have to have the time or resources to do it. And skill. They have to know how to do it. And if any of those three aren't present, that behavior doesn't stick, right? And we have to consider that whenever we develop a program to support that. We've got to tap into the motivation, design in a way that's relevant for capacity, work on the right skills to make that behavior stick. Now, one of the things that we did, and we've been doing this kind of over the last kind of 12 to 18 months, is we've been out speaking with professional service staff and university researchers to kind of understand what's going on here. We've learned a lot, but there's some key insights that I want to point out that are specifically relevant here. First is, in conversation with some professional service staff, there was this belief that researchers might only have one kind of viable commercial opportunity in their career, right? They don't have that many. That was the belief. And when we started talking to researchers, in fact, they've got loads of ideas, loads of commercial opportunities, right? The thing we kind of did is, as we were talking to the researchers, said, well, you've got loads of opportunities, commercial ideas. Where are they? Can you show me them? Like, show me where they're at, right? Because we can work on them. I said, no, they're in my head. Like, so we haven't written them down anywhere, right? So we've got all these ideas, but they're not captured anywhere. They aren't defined. Third key idea is there was no real understanding of commercial value. Okay, how much is it worth? I don't know. Now, why is this important? Why is this important? If we are asking for investment, right, in resources and time, it's very difficult to invest resources and time into something that you don't know the potential worth of. Right? We need to start being able to put a value around some of these things. And finally, many universities are starting to use kind of a stage gate system, right? Where you kind of identify opportunities and go through a process, and at those different stages of the process, they get different types of support. Now, one of the things we found is that this stage gate process can be quite off-putting for many researchers, right? Because it asks certain types of questions that can be difficult to answer with any degree of certainty. So what it then is they kind of go, I can't answer those questions, so they go away. But we never told them or taught them how to answer those questions. So those ideas kind of disappear. So those systems can be off-putting around that. So through this process, what we then kind of discovered was actually in the context of this innovation and commercialization process, there was a big issue, a big problem, if you will, between I've got an idea in my head and it's defined well enough to move into existing support where at the universities. Because the universities actually have pretty good systems in place once the ideas have been identified and developed. And you've got the researchers who have ideas, but there's a gap. There's a problem in that define and discovery phase. So that's where we decided to go to work. Now, there's another issue. And we're going to bring in Orla here in just a minute to kind of explain this a little bit more. There's another issue, right? So professional services should be able to help with this, right? In theory, they should be able to go down and work with the researchers to help them develop those ideas. But we've got a capacity issue. We've got thousands of university researchers. We've got hundreds of thousands of companies out in industry, right? And you've got professional service staff who are somehow trying to make these connections. And literally, there's tens of them, relatively speaking. You can see the problem. There's a pinch point. There's a pinch point. So a lot of what people are trying to do is they say, well, let's upskill the researchers on how to do this better, which is great. But you can see what happens. We might actually even exacerbate the problem because we haven't increased the capacity of professional services to support that. And this leads to even more frustration. Okay? So the solution could be, well, yes, we should be supporting and growing the capability of researchers, but we also need to be supporting and growing the capability of professional services to support that activity. And that is where we start to focus for the pilot program. So in summary, focusing on defining discovery phase, building capacity both in the researcher and the professional services, and building it in a way that's taking into consideration motivation, capacity, and skills. I have talked far too much. Over to you, Rachel, and kind of take it from here.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, fantastic summary, and it really takes us to a great place to move on to invite our first guest onto the webinar. So, Ola, if you'd like to jump onto the screen there, and I can introduce you to our guests. So fantastic to have Ola here, who worked with us to kind of bring this problem to life with us, unearth the problem and show us from her perspective how it existed within the Scottish ecosystem. So it would be great, Ola, just to get us started, if you could introduce yourself and your really fantastic and interesting role within the Scottish ecosystem, because I'm not sure if that is an equivalent role elsewhere in the UK.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Zach. This is a really interesting topic. So my name is Orla Kelly. My job title is Knowledge Exchange and Innovation Collaboration Manager. I work across all of the universities in Scotland. I recognise there's some English colleagues. So to put my job in context, our equivalent of HIFE in Scotland is top sliced and given to the University of West of Scotland to host me on behalf of all the universities. So I'm essentially owned by all of the universities, and I connect with the knowledge exchange and innovation teams and try to help them meet with each other and help them do their jobs better, essentially.
Fantastic, thank you, Ola. It sounds like such a tough job to kind of bring all of those people together and keep some momentum after you've met. How many people approximately do you kind of engage with? Zach saying there's kind of tens of professional services, just to kind of put that in context a little bit.
Do you know what, that's really interesting. All of the universities are different shapes and sizes. There are some universities where there's one person that wears all the hats, and so that you see them at the different meetings, and then other universities have lots of staff and are just resourced very differently. So yeah, I definitely reach out into lots of different colleagues. I couldn't put a number on it, and there are blurred lines. Some of the names in the chat, like there's someone with a researcher development job title. They're not typically sitting on any knowledge exchange and innovation activities, but there's definitely blurred lines that we should be, as a sector, better at exploiting and taking advantage of.
Yeah, I guess that makes it really, really tough to get to know how much of an impact that or reach that you have as well. Yeah. So I'm sure everybody in the audience can kind of relate to that, how difficult it is to network in the sector. Before I get started on asking you some questions about relevant to the webinar, for our guests in the audience, if you have any questions for Ola, or in fact for Zach and I, as well as kind of talking to Ola for the next few minutes, drop them into the chat box. I will try, or Zach will try, to field some questions to me, but I have asked the team to stay on after the webinar, and I will try and capture some comments on your questions, and it'll be a bit of an outtake style follow-up that will come with the recording. So if there is anything that springs to mind, we'll try and answer it, but if not, we'll get back to you after. So I guess, Ola, just to come back to you, it would be great if you could describe why you think professional services are so important. When the goal is to increase the amount of knowledge exchange and commercialisation that comes from research to drive economic growth in Scotland, why do you think professional services play such a key role in that?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Because I work across the universities in Scotland, my answer is kind of framed with a Scottish context, but I think you could apply this to anywhere. So replace Scotland with England or Ireland or US or whatever, and I don't think it's the same messaging. A couple of years ago, Scotland published its National Strategy for Economic Transformation, and it has a whole section on entrepreneurial people and culture. And then they published another strategy paper a year later, the National Innovation Strategy, and it says it aims to make Scotland one of the most innovative small nations in the world. And then we have other things like the Entrepreneurial Campus Blueprint that came out of Scottish Government, or there was a UK spin-out review that came out of UK Government. But what do all of these really grand policy papers actually mean on the ground, and for the people involved. Because the outputs that government and policymakers are wanting to see, they don't happen by magic. And if we're going to see this good research translated into innovations that positively impact our economy and positively impact our society here in Scotland or beyond, we really need to facilitate that translation. And that's where the professional services colleagues come in. And I could speak all day about funding challenges and incentivisation in our universities. And I won't, but I will say very briefly that there's not a lot of money going around, and we are not going to see a massive injection of cash that will transform the capacity of our research commercialisation teams in our universities, the bubble at the centre of Zach's diagram. So we do need to be more creative in how we are raising the ambition of our institutions and how we are equipping them with the right tools and the right support to really have the impact that they want to have.
Fantastic, thank you. And yeah, I mean, changing the level of funding is a big challenge, and so that efficiency piece or that upskilling piece is going to be really transformational. So what do you think the professional services staff that you're talking to would benefit from when trying to address this transformation of policy into practice that will yield outputs?
I think it's such a massive topic. So briefly mention funding. I won't go into it. Leadership, I think, is really important, and I won't go into it. I'll pick up on capacity that Zach already talked about. And one thing that I think that we as a sector kind of overlook is the very early pipeline stuff, early stage stuff. We're not putting a lot of resource into it. Our research innovation offices are quite often firefighting, and they're not concentrating on that very early pipeline. They don't have time, they don't have capacity, they're not concentrating on their own professional development and how that can have longer term impacts. So I think that's quite significant. We have, particularly in Scotland, we have really brilliant interventions later on in the pipeline. So things like Converge or Scottish Enterprise High Growth Spin Out programme. But if we're relying just on them, we're only going to go for the stuff that's ready to roll, right? How are we getting the stuff in place before that? I'm going to bring up something quite interesting. We have such a short-termism in our system in general. Where our funding is, we'll ask questions like how many jobs are going to be created in 6 months' time. I don't know, none. It's hard. How do you answer that? There was a RAND Europe analysis of REF 2021 case studies. I can find the link and put it in the chat, or people can Google it. And it stated that the average time lag between the start of research to the end of impact was approximately 10 years. And that's huge, when we're working in this system with short-termism and like I say, we're only going to go for the low-hanging fruit. We're going to be missing opportunities and potentially shutting the door completely to lots of people in our system. And this in turn will then have massive implications for equality and diversity objectives in our institutions. So I don't know the answer to that question. It's massive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that 10 years is an average, but in the sector I worked in, it's probably closer to 25. So yeah, fantastic. And I think just picking up on the capacity issue, and we will get into that when Zach brings the programme to life a little bit more. Capacity was a key design feature. People don't have extra time. They can give up a little bit of time to invest in themselves, but there isn't a huge amount of slack in the system. So the programme that we designed had to be very conscious of that. I guess just to kind of to bring it to life a little bit more, when you're talking to an individual professional services member of staff, what kind of struggles do you hear from them on a kind of, their day-to-day basis?
I think it's really interesting because there are those colleagues who are aware of the wider pressures, so the strategy and policy decisions that are being made, the things that we are measured how we measure success. Typically it's income generated, or there's a number beside something that can exist in an Excel sheet. And there are people that are so aware of that and recognize that how we measure success doesn't necessarily tell any story on the value that any project is contributing to our society or to our economy, really. So that's one of the things. And then there's a whole other group of people who are just cracking on with their day job, totally irrespective of the policy landscape, right? And they're just trying to get the job done. Typically, no matter the size of institution or how well resourced your team is or isn't, everyone is coming up against similar challenges. Everyone's very stretched, and everyone's quite tired, I would say. And so I think there's something really powerful. I assume you're going to come across this, the kind of cohort approach to things. I think it's really powerful to learn that the grass isn't necessarily greener somewhere else. I think that's a really useful thing for professional services staff and other colleagues to recognise in their work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the programs that we do where we bring people together from different institutions, that's one of the light bulb moments. Is like, oh, it's not just me, it's not just my institution, and there's actually a lot of power there when you're developing relationships across institutions. So the work you do, and the emphasis in Scotland for working together, I think has real benefit. I think I can hand over back to Zach to start to actually put some shape around this program, and thank you so much for contributing there to putting some perspective on what has driven you to work with us and to come up with this solution, and test the pilot program. So thank you very much, Orla. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks both.
Thank you very much. Thanks again, Orla. Thanks for taking the time to join us today, and thanks for all the hard work and putting the program together to begin with. And I think Orla and the Skillfluence team and kind of other parts of the ecosystem are constantly kind of exploring this challenge and trying to figure out how best we can kind of help with that. So we're beating the drum. We're beating the drum because we believe wholeheartedly that one of the greatest opportunities to release all of that potential really is supporting and helping increase capability and capacity within the professional service staff, and that can have a cascade effect as well. So we'll keep beating that drum and doing our best to kind of move that forward. So thank you again. Okay, so that's kind of led to a kind of core research question, which became the basis for the pilot program. Okay, so a lot of what we do and our approach here at Skillfluence is we're looking for interesting problems. And when people go kind of say, how would we do that? That's like, oh, interesting question. What if we could turn that into a hypothesis or a pilot program? We could test it to see if we could figure it out. So we took these conversations with Orla and said, well, what's the question here? The question became, how might we equip professional service staff with the tools, the skills, and the confidence to enable them to really drive increased levels of commercialization? How might we do that? Okay, good question. And then we started to kind of go to work on it. And what we did in kind of in the journey, and if you put this on the continuum of where we're going, where we are and where we're going. So we've run a pilot program, right? So if you think about the big circle as the entire population of professional service staff, right? In Scotland, in UK, and in Europe, right? How big do we want to go? And that little blue dot is the pilot that we did with six universities here in Scotland. And we learned a lot, and we actually had great success. But the next step is, how do you take that and how do you expand that circle? How do you open up to the next group? So instead of just 6, maybe it's now 20. Right? Or maybe it's a different group of professional service or in a different sector. Right? And then you do that enough times, you cover the whole population. Okay? Each time you expand that circle, you adapt it to make it more, you adapt it and improve it to make it more effective. So if there's anyone out there who has the ability to access funding, the next step in the process is to take what we've learned in that little blue dot and make that a bigger circle. And a bigger circle, and keep building that. That's how we can solve the problem. Okay. So we're kind of at that first section, starting to move into the section with kind of version 0.2 of some pilots, which we'll talk about later. Okay. So the design of the approach, right? And we sat down and we said, what's the design brief? What must it do? Okay. Here's the criteria. It must deliver outputs, right? It can't be a theoretical exercise. It must be time efficient. People don't have extra time, right? Has to be time efficient. It must develop skills for researchers. It must develop skills for professional service staff. And it must have the potential to be scalable, right? At this level, right, it's like, okay, it's resource intensive to kind of get it going, but we must be able to see a route to how we could deploy this for hundreds or thousands of people, right, to really move the dial. And that was what we tried to create. So where we ended up with the program, and some of this seems really, really simple, but it's almost about what could you cut away? How could you make it so lean and so effective and so simple, right? Easy to use, easy to use. That was the mindset. So we ended up with 4 90-minute sessions run online every 2 weeks, 1 hour between sessions with very specific activity, and it led to a presentation and a decision point. Final decision point. And everything was geared towards action as quickly as possible, getting people to take action against their opportunity. Okay. We don't have time for fluff. We don't have time for theoretical exercises. You gotta get down to work. Okay. And what we found is that the participants loved it. They were like, yes, we're working, right? Let's just do it. Let's go do it. Let's get to it. Make it happen, right? And they appreciated that. So the way this kind of ended up is we ended up working with 6 universities, and we did it in pairs, right? This is kind of a unique approach. We had one researcher buddied up with one professional service staff from 6 different universities together as one cohort. Okay, that was the model. Okay. And what we did is, if you link it back to the innovation process, it aligned with that, right? Because the researchers that came on this program, they had ideas. So it wasn't like we had to create new stuff. We had to kind of just take what was already there, go through a very quick process to define it, get them moving into discovery, and then to present and then make a decision. So after the end of the program, we say, this is what we're gonna do next. And oftentimes it was linked to getting funding to move into development, right? So you're really focusing on that early stage process to go from idea in your head to something that we could get kind of funded. Okay, that was the concept, right to the point. So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Rachel, who's going to kind of have a chat with 2 of the participants, one of the pairs who went through the program, Dr. Annika Hoke and Susan Armstrong, to share their experience.
Thanks, Zach. Annika, Susan, if you could switch on your videos, and we can have a quick chat there. And thank you so much for joining us. And I think your experience of bringing that program design to life will really help the audience here. So if you could introduce yourselves briefly, your name and your role with it within Glasgow Caledonian University, and then we can move on.
So my name is Dr. Annika Hoke. My professional background is in podiatry, but I'm currently a postdoctoral research fellow in the School of Health and Life Sciences at Glasgow Caledonian University.
Fantastic. Thanks, Annika. And Susan?
I'm Susan Armstrong. I'm the Contracts and IP Manager with additional responsibility for knowledge exchange. I sit within the Research and Innovation Office within the university.
Fantastic, thanks both. And just again for the audience, while Susan and Annika are chatting here, if there's any questions that you think of, we will endeavour to answer them as part of the session, or as I say, afterwards, we'll do a bit of an outtakes. But what I will be inviting Susan and Annika to do is actually start by presenting the output from the programme. So the opportunity that Annika and Susan worked on over those 4 sessions is going to be presented to you now as if they were on the last part of that programme. So just to show you immediately what kind of output that Annika and Susan were able to create in just 8 hours of contact time as part of this programme. So Zach's working the controls. Annika and Susan, over to you to introduce us to your opportunity.
So our opportunity name is Speak Ultrasound. Speak Ultrasound provides fast-track ultrasound proficiency via online training without delays, cost, and the time of traditional learning.
So our thought process for the problem was that currently patients in NHS Scotland face wait times of up to 48 weeks for a radiology ultrasound scan and treatment of their foot and ankle conditions. So what they've done in NHS Ayrshire and Arran is that they've trained allied health professionals to conduct these scans themselves. And what they found is that traditional radiology ultrasound scans costs around 144,000 annually, whereas if you train podiatrists, this would only cost 62,000, resulting in significant cost savings. However, currently training allied health professionals in ultrasound imaging in Scotland takes up to 9 months and costs around 4 grand, discouraging participation due to cost and time away from family and work.
So we came up with the solution of Pathway to Mastery. It provides a 2-day training course that allows participants access to state-of-the-art equipment, personalised instruction with no more than 3 participants per instructor, and these are experts in the field. They're mentor-led, so they'll be available for mentoring after the training course, provides comprehensive learning, and they'll have access to online resources that will be available to them after their training.
So while a similar solution does exist in England, our program is unique to Scotland. So despite having many ultrasound training experts, existing programs require face-to-face theory, and our course offers a fully online theoretical component, allowing individuals to learn at their own pace. This is supposed to help reduce costs, but also help NHS potentially cut down on enormous waiting times for scans.
So the impact that will come from this training course, it's the upskilling of staff to reduce those significant ultrasound waiting times. We're looking at the price point for the course to be around £999, and that's got potential annual revenue yield of £5 million. It's facilitating CPD learning opportunities for allied health professionals to further their careers and experience. It's practical training without the burden of either the travel or the time consideration for the other training courses, and it would ultimately reduce the burden of chronic illness for the NHS and save costs.
So some of the unknowns that we identified was, what do we actually pay staff and mentors for their participation in training these individuals? And we thought there might be some potential recruitment difficulties if NHS staff or private staff can't get time off work. We also had to consider regulatory accreditation and if we could even offer clinician certification.
So the actions that we take to mitigate those risks. The price point, would have discussions with NHS colleagues, of which we have many within the university, just to see if we're pricing it at the correct price point. We would also seek to leverage internal resources at GCU through staff commitment and school participation. We suggested taking short polls to identify the appetite of training within the allied health professionals sector. And then we could run mini taster workshops just to spark interest and indeed test the proposition and then ultimately demonstrate the value of that training. From those sessions, we'd be able to get internal testimonials that we could use in the promotion of the wider course. And we would review the requirements for case accreditation so that we could provide certificates at the end of the training. And that's it.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, both. And I'm sure you will agree with me that that was an absolutely, I'm absolutely blown away by that presentation and how much that opportunity developed over those 4 weeks. Was just fantastic. And just to remind you, Annika and Susan worked together for about 8 hours on this presentation, and it's succinct, it's clear, and just to have that tangible commercial value, I think to be able to talk about it must just make a huge difference. So yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. Susan, which part of the programme was most impactful for you coming on this as a professional services member of staff?
I think the opportunity to explore those commercial potentials, as you say, we know academics have lots of ideas, but actually formulating them, getting them written down, and then going through the process with Skillfluence to identify ideas and then drop off those that we didn't think were going to work. Annika and I probably came up with about 4 ideas that we were then able to hone into real potentials, and then ultimately rest with the presentation that we've just given. But I would say the most significant thing is probably working through that with Annika, working collaboratively and as a partnership through the training, through the development, and working on our own outside the training course was probably the most valuable point for me. We might send academics off for commercialisation training, we undertake training, but to do it together was really the added value of this course.
Oh, fantastic. And I think it is sharing that common language as well, because if you're provided with training that takes you perhaps in 2 different directions or describes 2 different ways, or even just uses different words, then it could be that you still don't talk the same language when you meet again. And just remind me, had you worked with Annika before? Had you worked together before?
No, complete newbies. Hadn't even met Annika. The opportunity arose, and I spoke to our research impact officer, who was able to give indications of who would be a good candidate to take this forward. So I think it was also relationship building within this course, and it allowed us to be able to assess our understanding in a pair, so we could assist each other in elements and identify, areas where we weren't sure what was, being meant, and we could assist each other. So it was truly collaborative.
Thanks. And it's I think one of the things I saw was that kind of coaching mentality of of each other, because you were having that opportunity to lean in and ask Annika a little bit more about research, or Annika to ask a little bit more about the process in that kind of safe environment as well. Because one of the things we often find is that people are almost too frightened to ask questions that they think they should know the answer to as well.
Exactly.
Fantastic. And a great question from Kirsty in the chat box, asking Annika if how much of the idea did you have before the programme started?
So my interest in ultrasound has always been there, but I knew that it was an issue that had been highlighted by many of the students taking other programs. So the idea was actually from them. And we saw what had been done in England and thought, let's just try and replicate what they've done. They've already got a blueprint, but we could make it unique and try and make it better, quicker. So that was our sole idea when we kind of started.
And I think what I found when I was listening to you in each week was that this isn't new research. It's applying an idea in an environment that will create that commercial opportunity. So could you maybe describe a little bit more about how you chose this idea from your research portfolio?
So I think what was great about working with Susan was that we had a rapid iteration of refinement and doing things through the do, study, act cycle. So although we had plenty of ideas that Susan had spoken about before, what was great was that we could quickly test it, improve it, find the core issues, and then be like, okay, we can move this forward. Or often it would result in failure, and that was okay too. It was okay to accept that our idea maybe wasn't that great and move on to something that had been done before, but actually trying to make it unique and marketable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And there was another researcher that came on the program that said exactly the same thing. To be told no is an okay answer, is really unusual in academia. So for him to make the decision that no, this is not the right thing to pursue, felt very empowering, because you've got many more ideas, and for one reason, this one is the best now, and the rest have to be parked because there isn't an opportunity to do everything.
Yeah, exactly. I think sorry, I think that's the best part about the collaboration, is that you get other opinions from people who've done this before.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a question to you both before we have to move on as time is marching ahead. So what, if anything, are you doing differently since the programme?
So with my respect, I'm not doing anything differently due to capacity issues. What I am very aware of is building this into our future operations. So our plans for the team and commercialisation within GCU, building this exploration and a programme of this nature for hopefully future colleagues in this sphere. And the sort of the application of being in that safe space to identify these areas. I think safe space was a good analogy there, Rachel, that you used, and the methods by which you can drill down rather quickly as to what's viable or not. So certainly something that we're taking forward.
Yeah, so looking at how you can build a system to give you that framework to make decisions much more quickly, so you're not spending too much time on things that maybe aren't viable or aren't priorities for the university's knowledge exchange and commercialisation output.
Exactly, that very quick schedule from identification to what you can take forward. I think that's invaluable.
Excellent, thanks. And Annika?
So I echo everything that Susan said. Capacity currently just is not available where we're at this time in our university's progress, but I feel like what we've tried to do is look at different research opportunities and look at impact and outreach quite differently. I think previously we were probably thinking of publications, conferences, and not actually thinking about it as a commercial opportunity. So I think it's more just how it's equipped me with a more strategic mindset to future projects.
Fantastic, thank you. And so that breadth of opportunity to explore different avenues for different aspects of the research. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and bringing that program to life, because seeing it flat on the screen as Zach's describing it, it really helps to illustrate that and put some color around it. So thank you very much. Just for the audience, I'm going to run through the main output. So as Zach said, we had 6 pairs of researchers and professional services staff that were trained on the approach. Each created at least 3 commercial opportunities identified and defined, conducted that fast and cheap discovery, so making those unknowns known, again, as Zach and Annika and Susan described. They were then tasked with prioritising which one they wanted to work on, and they were given a framework for making that decision. So then there were 6 top opportunities, went through a second cycle of fast and cheap discovery. So we found out a little bit more about it, refined them and presented them. And that was the output type that we saw on the last session. And again, just to reiterate, this is only 8 hours of work time. So really confined capacity. The other thing we wanted to demonstrate, and touching on Ola's point, is that we need to demonstrate a measurable change from a significant investment in a program like this, even as a pilot program. And typically what funders are looking for are quantitative and qualitative measures. So we chose to look at increased confidence levels. This is typically the Skillfluence approach to evaluation, because we believe if people are more confident in and having clarity and the competency to take something forward, then confidence is that last measure that will give them the impetus or the action to be able to take something forward. So from a researcher perspective, we tested confidence before and after the program. And in the bottom right, you'll see that researchers developed their commercialization readiness by over 80%. So they were about a 5 out of 10 before they started in confidence, and right up and over 9 towards the end of the program. And just picking out a few of the high numbers there. So 172% increase in quickly being able to validate a commercial opportunity. So that's exactly what Susan was describing about, Annika was describing about, being able to say no to something because you know a little bit more. And then the other one, so the clarity on what the next steps are to progress the commercial opportunity, because if you can't define what the next step is, you're just going to stay stagnant. So, for us, that showed a real likelihood that somebody is going to be able to do something different. And I think just again, I mentioned the researcher from UWS said, this is the only commercialization training I've had in my career, and I think he was about mid-50s. He got such a lot from this 8 hours, and it was fantastic to see. So similarly, results for professional service staff, we identified the competencies we thought professional services staff would benefit from through this program. And we saw a 40% increase in their ability to support commercialization. Now, they started from a much higher position. They are pretty confident people, they do their job day to day, as Orla said, but we still managed to get a 40% increase in their confidence in how they could work with researchers. And again, just picking out some of the higher numbers. So again, the first one, the ability to help researchers to identify opportunities from their research. So that coaching methodology of how to think about a research portfolio from the commercial perspective, which is perhaps something, as Annika showed, is not necessarily the way that researchers think about how to develop their research. And the other one I really like is the ability the professional services staff felt they had to communicate the potential value of a commercial opportunity from the research portfolio. So they felt much more confident that they knew how to describe that. And I think, again, just bringing some anecdotal evidence, because it's these stories that bring it to life, bring the numbers to life for the funder. So a colleague from Glasgow School of Art, new to knowledge exchange, came on the programme and realised that she didn't have to be an expert in all of GSA's research and all of the commercial routes to market. Her role was to work alongside the researcher, be a coach and a critical friend, and applying that system and that methodology. And she felt so much more confident that she could do her job because she had taken that burden of needing to know about, all of the research detail, all of the routes to market, when she's starting a new role. So again, that increase of confidence, might encourage her to be able to go and talk to more researchers and, have those open and critical conversations. So it was fantastic to work alongside the pairs over that program. I really enjoyed it.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Annika. Thanks, Susan. Thanks again for all of your hard work during the program, and thanks again for taking the time to share your experience today. Super helpful and insightful, kind of bringing that to life. And really, I'm really quite proud of the process and things that we kind of were able to achieve in such a small amount of time, 8 hours. And I think that ability, yes, there's so much that can be, in terms of the process and everything, but that ability to take that idea and succinctly in one slide, and I don't know if we were timing it there, but it felt like maybe 90 seconds to be able to take a complex idea and explain it in a way that I would suspect everybody in the audience could understand and could go talk to somebody about and connect with somebody and say how you might be able to make it better. That is that define process. We should not underestimate the value of clearly being able to define and articulate what the opportunity is, because if we are not able to do that, we can't do anything with it. We can't activate the opportunity until we can define it in writing. Really powerful, really powerful. Cool. So I'm going to share some of our kind of key insights and learnings as we reflected on the process. So we learned loads through this. And one of the key learnings, and we'd never done this before, to do this as pairs, and there is real power in this. There's power in having the professional service staff and the researcher go on the journey together. As Susan and Annika were talking about it, so many unexpected benefits came from that, right? They kept each other accountable. They developed a common language. They learned they started to appreciate the value of each other, right? Doing that separately, it would have been entirely different, and I would argue a much less effective process had they been separate. How important it is to get to work immediately. I mean, I remember sitting here in the vault where we do our planning here in the office, and Rachel and I were sitting here going, what can we get rid of? What can we get rid of? How do we get to the point quicker? Edit, because we only had, that small amount of time. And what it ended up with was the most important stuff, right? Defining opportunities is key. We think about it as the innovation process. If we can start defining those opportunities that are sitting within the researchers' brains, they're there, they exist, but they exist in a way that we can't do anything with them. Right? We have to define them. Frameworks, there was a question in the chat box about how do we increase capacity when we can't hire more people? Frameworks, processes, consistency, right? These are things that can help around this, right? A common framework. And one could argue, as you can see, if you start to equip professional service staff with this, it would increase the number of researchers they could support because they've got an efficient process by which they can support them, right? And they're starting to teach and train and coach the researchers how to take on some of this activity on their own, right? It's understanding the role that they play. It allows you to work with more people. Relationship building is extremely valuable. You build trust, you build understanding. You've got someone you can pick up the phone to, right? Do people still do that? Pick up the phone and call, right? But you say, I know who to connect with if I have a question and need some help. And I would say there's significant commercial opportunities now. I know kind of Orla mentioned, there's, some things can't take time, right? And absolutely, right? There's some work, we do things now, it's going to take 10 years to deliver. But we have been doing that work, for many decades. And we are sitting on opportunities that do not require 10 years of gestation, right? They just need to be identified and moved forward. There are opportunities now for creating jobs, for creating companies, for creating licensing opportunities. We are sitting in them right now. We just do not have a good process for identifying them and moving them forward. And I would say, looking back on this does have the potential to scale. The way that we did this could be reproduced to go from 6 to 10 to 100 to 1,000. There is a scalable model to this. There is no reason why every professional service staff in Scotland could not be trained on this approach. And what would that mean? We would take that circle in the middle of that bow tie and it would open it up. So where do we go from here? We think there's significant opportunity. We're already taking the next steps. So we've got version 0.2 of this program we're currently running with a different university. It's one institution specifically, helping them with this. Working on presenting this as an approach to the Scottish government to see how we might develop this and deploy this and fund this. We're also working with the UKRI Technology Mission Hubs and Awards in Engineering Biology to how we can deploy this as part of some of the work they're doing from a commercialization perspective. And we are absolutely open to other partners, institutions who are interested in taking this approach, either exactly as in say, yeah, let's go with this. But more interesting is like, how do we adapt it to make it relevant for your institution, for your specific situation, make it even better, right? Become something that can really help drive things forward. Just a couple little things to wrap up. We have, that's kind of the program. One thing to think about, the next webinar coming up is on October 9th. And this is a super cool one. We know how difficult it is to get people onto programs. We spend a lot of time thinking about how do we position it, how do we market it, how do we promote it, how do we structure it. On October 9th, we're going to explore this specifically, right? How do you put together programs and market them and promote them in a way that you're guaranteed that they're full? And we're going to talk about a specific case study that had exceptional results we'd never seen before in terms of attendance. We're going to share exactly how that was done. So some really valuable stuff you can take away from that. If you want to register now, there in the chat box, there is a link. You can register to the webinar coming right out of this. It'll be should be a really good one. Have a great guest who's going to talk about their experiences with that as well. If you guys want to talk to us and kind of think about how we might be able to work together, as we talked about, there's different ways we can work together. We can do some consulting engagements to figure out how best to help you. We've got fixed programs, standalone programs, similar to this and others. And also we kind of can take a broader view of what is your strategic KPI and how do we put the different pieces together in a way that really strategically help you deliver against those KPIs. Drop us an email, scan the QR code. You can book a meeting. We love to talk, no pressure, trying to just figure out how best we can help. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. Rachel, do you have anything else to say before we say goodbye?
No, I've had more than my usual chance to speak, so thank you very much. It's been great having everybody to talk to today.
Well, I second that. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, great rest of the week, and we will see you hopefully in October for the next webinar. Take care.